unbeknownst to us, it ended up being a 3-hour conversation the first time that we got together. And then after that conversation, I went over to the Independent and I told them that I thought that there was a bigger story to be done. And Hank and I ended up meeting about 12 hours over cocktails in his studio, talking about his career, and ended up being a cover story about 2 years ago. And ever since, we get together periodically, again over cocktails, which, you know, this is water, Pellegrino here that we have in front of us tonight. And we talk about life and art, and then a few months ago, you know, he told me, I want you to see an early peek to this exhibit that you're seeing right now, a new work, and I was just blown away by what he'd done. I want to put him on the spot. I think that he's the greatest painter that Santa Barbara has. He's one of the best painters, period, but he happens to be the best painter that Santa Barbara has. Also, happens to be one of the most, the richest things that has happened in our friendship happens to be one of the richest things that has happened in my life in the past 2 years. And it's been quite an incredible a gift to the times that we sit around talking. Has been definitely a blessing to my life. So anyway, with that said, I wanted to point out that there is 3 themes going on. There's 3 sets of collections in this gallery called Primal. And one of the things that Hank and I talked about was about that a painting is singular. It's non-sequential, and that you see it all at once when you look at a painting, and all the parts are affecting you at once, and you have to hang paintings very carefully so they don't become sequential. And I wanted to start talking about that, the fact that you have 3 different ideas, 3 different sets of paintings, groups of paintings here, and the fact how difficult it was to hang this particular show.
Well, first of all, thanks, Roger, and thank you all for coming, and thanks to the gallery. And as far as hanging it was really simple because they did it. I brought the paintings in and I started to move them around, and it's fun to, you know, when you put different paintings together, they affect each other differently, and that was interesting. And then I looked over and they were all tapping their feet, and I realized it was time to go. You know, hanging a show is it's a real art unto itself. And one of the things about, I think, a good hanging is that all the paintings can be seen separately. So, I mean, there's these 3 paintings that are similar in terms of theme and view and size. Well, that one, and this one. And when you put them all together, something else happens. You know, it becomes a sequence. It becomes kind of a sequential narrative. And I make my paintings, well, I think that paintings in a way have to stand on their own. You know, they have to be separate out in the world and not supported by other paintings. I mean, they don't have to be, but that's what I'm interested in. And that's what I think really good paintings do, is that they stand up on their own. And paintings are, I think, the only art form that is non-sequential. You know, every other art form kind of, well, it's like you can't see the front and back of a sculpture at the same time. You can't read the 2nd page and the 5th page of a book. But a painting, all of it is affecting you all of the time. So, you know, you can kind of get it. Some people will skip over a couple of pages, or you don't have to see that part of the movie. You know, you can fast forward. But in a painting, all of it is affecting you all the time. It's almost like the light waves, you know, that are coming at you as like a chord of music, and they all have to be in harmony, or they aren't. You know.
I'm going to quote the first line of the article, the second article that we did a few weeks back. You said, whatever is going on in the world ends up in your work. I like the idea of painters being witnesses, of showing truth as it is. I like painters being able to develop and discover an image of who we are. With that in mind, you know, can you tell us a brief introduction about what compelled you about this series of paintings?
Well, these paintings, you know, were painted over the last 2 years, and the last 2 years have been difficult, right? I mean, they've been difficult for all of us, I think, as a group, and almost everyone I know individually has had some real hardships, you know, nationally and locally, and personally. And so these paintings, in a lot of ways, were consciously about getting through that, you know, seeing the other side of that. I think that nature for me has always been solace, you know. It's a place that I go when I'm happy, and it's a place I go when I'm sad. It's a place I go when I don't know, you know, what's going on. And there is that kind of idea in Moby Dick. I've always loved that idea of water gazing. You know, that description of people being drawn to the shore and looking out to sea. There's something primal, there's something archetypal about that idea of sort of looking out to the sea. That's where we look for answers. You know, the sea, I think, in a lot of ways represents the great unconscious. So you're standing there and you're waiting for something to pop up, you know, or come ashore. So this show, you know, there are the paintings of the sea, and then also what I consciously did is I made these paintings of the sand dunes, and when I was making those sand dunes, I just had this really odd feeling, and I couldn't figure out what's wrong with that. You know, it was really hard to make the paintings of the sand dunes. And then finally I realized that to go down on the beach and sit with my back to the ocean was just the wrong thing to do. It was just so unnatural, you know. I mean, it's unnatural as somebody that is interested in the waves, and it's just unnatural, I think, for anybody to go on the beach and turn their back to the sea. So I did a few of those sand dune paintings, and I wanted to continue with them, but I realized that wasn't the thing to do. So I don't know.
No. I mean, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I want to know you're not. We never get off track. I want to point out that the series, so the blue paintings that are in the back, you have the sand dunes and you have the surfboard. Those are the ones that he's speaking about. Those are the Coil Point Reserve paintings. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones that when I started talking to Hank, those are the ones that he's dealing about the environment. And we're going to get into what is it about those paintings that engages about the environment. The painting that is right over here, the orange one, and the one immediately in back of us, those were painted in Point Conception. And when I first saw those paintings, I thought that they were an allegory to immigration issues. And Hank and I are going to talk about why that I was, you know, that was the idea of dealing with issues of immigration. And then you have the bees, and you have the radishes over here. And those paintings were Hank's response to the fires and to the mudslides and to the tragedies that happened in Jericho. And so, what I wanted you to talk about is what you told me, that those issues are reflected in nature, and you're observing what is happening in nature, and those issues you saw while you were preparing these paintings.
Yeah, well, to answer your previous question, which is tied into that a little bit, is, and I think this is true, I mean, everybody recognizes this, is you kind of think you know what you're doing, and then when you look back on it, it's a little different than what you thought you were doing at the time. Did I really say that? You know? Like at one point I was doing all of these paintings from my studio from Colorado Point looking at the university, and I was really interested in the ravens and the crows, and then I looked back on it, and it was a time that was really difficult at the university because of the chancellor. And they were all these sort of big black ravens sitting on the university. You know, there's all this talk about immigration now, and one of the things that's been kind of it's fascinating for me to learn is everything I thought was natural, everything I thought was local isn't really. You know, the wild radishes are not native. The honeybees are not native. It was really surprising when I learned that you know, there's about 3,000, I think, different species of bees in California, and the honeybees are not one of the natural ones. You know, and the bees that are natural, that are native to California, are solitary, most of them, and they live in the ground, and they're adapted to the drought, so that when we have these drought years, they can hibernate in the ground until there's enough moisture for them to come out. I mean, who knew? There's also, I found out, a bee called the iridescent green sweat bee, which I'm trying to find, and I want to make a painting of that. I want to paint an iridescent little bee. But so, you know, so all of these things here, you go outside and you stand there and you're thinking you're looking at what's natural or what's native, and none of it's native, you know? And the same thing with the painting over there. The only thing that's native there really is the giant coreopsis, which is really native and very particular to Santa Barbara. I think it only grows really 4 places in the world which are really close to us right here. But then, you know, the aloes are not native, the ice plant is not native, and so, you know, it just kind of mirrors this idea of, I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of the scientists and the naturalists at UCSB, and they've been teaching me about this stuff in a lot of ways. And you know, there's this idea about what's an invasive species and what's a naturalized species, and my studio is right on a preserve, you know, the Colorado Point Reserve, and they have to work like mad to try to keep what's native, and then they have to figure out what's native. And some of them, when they first started doing that, and I thought, oh great, this is terrific, but then I realized that they were going to cut down all the magueyes that I like to paint, so I talked to them, can you leave that? Can you leave that one? You know, it's such a crazy thing. It's like, what's the answer to that? And it's just being enacted every day when we hear it in the news. Who should be here and who shouldn't, and who fits and who doesn't. But the thing that's really beautiful is all of that stuff together there, you know? I mean, all of those things that are from all around the world. I think the aloes are probably planted by the lighthouse keepers, because it was so remote, they probably used it medicinally. And there's these stories to all of these plants. And then you talk to the paleobotanist like Bruce Tiffany, you know, and he says, well, you go back far enough and you can find anything here. And it also, you know, in a funny way sort of speaks to growing up surfing. There's all these arguments about who gets the wave depending upon how long they've lived here.
When we were talking, and by the way, I've known you for 2 years. I've experienced your work for many years, and I was so impressed that this is your best work, and you're about to be turn 70, and we talked about that, and the fact that you're still growing, you're still exploring, you're still challenging things. One of the things that you told me in our conversation is that every day I felt I had a major revelation when I was working in these paintings. What I've been working on was the pattern of light and dark that lead you around. When you talked about dabble light, You know, can you tell our audience about that?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that that Roger and I, when we first met and started talking, realized that we shared was a real interest in how things are put together. So those of you that go to the Film Society meetings know that he talks about the structures of the films, patterns that are repeated, how the eye moves along through the films, and I've always been fascinated by that. You know, in paintings, you know, how do you put it together? Where do you put what? And in a lot of my paintings over the last, I don't know, well, number of decades, most of them are almost 100% observational. So I go out and I take the canvases, often, you know, larger, well, like this canvas, for instance, you know, this is painted primarily on location. And so I like to work on very large paintings on location, and I like to have them be about observation and that kind of contemplation. The other is these North Point paintings, that I call North Point paintings. They're all the same location. They were all done from smaller paintings I did, all of them from sitting in the same spot. But you see that they look quite different. And there's a different kind of painting that's about kind of collecting all this information and working in the studio and coming up with something that's about an experience, as opposed to going outside and making this painting and bringing it back in and seeing what you have. One is sort of conjuring something up. So, like in that painting in particular, I felt a lot of times when I was working on these, like, I felt like I was trying to translate something out of some language that I didn't know. You know, I'm just trying to fit the pieces together. And one of the things that really helped was, well, especially in the painting that's, I'm sorry to keep making you turn around in your chairs, but the one that I'm looking straight at there, but finally the way that I could sort of hold that painting together and put all those different things together, so the form or the rhythm of it was that kind of dappled light. You know, so if you look at it and you try to look at it just in terms of light and dark, there's all this sort of light and dark. And it's very artificial, you know, it's completely made up in the studio. And it's something I, you know, kind of discovered along the way. And having that pattern held the painting together, and I think it also speaks to that feeling. There's a lot of things in painting, I think the way that we respond to paintings a lot of times is, you know, in our very primitive brain. Certain colors, certain lines, certain shapes. You see something that's sort of human shaped, you walk in your house and there's something thrown on a chair and it's about the size of a human being and you react. The same thing's true in paintings, I believe, that, well, I totally believe, it's my experience, is little patterns speak to us, you know, in terms of how, what's kept us alive, how did we survive? We survived by being on the lookout for predators that were coming after us, or, you know, not eating the wrong things. So that was sort of the idea of the dappled light in that particular painting.
And you set me up for the next question, that I am very technical. I tend to analyze things and deconstruct things. And one of the things that I was struck with is paintings that you see all around Hanks, you know, this one and this one in particular. Notice the horizon line. In medieval paintings, the horizon line is high, and you're looking down on people. God's view of people. People are smaller. In Renaissance, and you can contradict me, in the Renaissance, the horizon moves down. You're looking up at the subject. In here, there's no fixed point. In these paintings, we're seeing the perfect view of things. You know, can you talk about that, the movement of the horizon?
Well, part of that, one aspect of that that's really was fascinating to me when I learned it in studying perspective, there's optical perspective. You know, an optical perspective is kind of mathematical. It's what happens in a camera when you're looking out of one eye, and most of you know something about there's 1-point perspective or 2-point perspective. But when you're looking at something, when you're looking straight at something, there's less distance from your eye to the thing you're looking straight at than something that's to the right or something, you know, on the same plane out there. And during the Renaissance, there was a lot of investigation into that, both mathematically and religiously. And they called that eye, that ray of light, or that distance between your eye when you're looking straight at somebody, the prince of rays. That's the least distortion. And as you move away from that, if you get peripheral, there's distortion. Just like in a wide-angle lens in a camera, you know, things get curvy over there. So the thing you're looking straight at is no distortion, it's a prince of rays. And then someone took it another step and they said, well, that God is able to see everything with that shortest distance. I mean, what an idea, right? I mean, what a fabulous idea. You can see everything, everywhere, with no distortion at the same time. And paintings, you know, I think that throughout the history of art, artists have realized that there's great power, much like we were talking about the primitive brain. There's great power in where you put the horizon, and you can move the horizon. So in painting, there's something called the false horizon. You'll make a really strong horizon line, and that'll make the viewer, when they're looking at that line, feel like they're down low, looking straight at something, and then you can look straight at something up above, and then you can change all of that around so that you're looking at a scene and you're traveling around all those places. You know, you're having, you know, sometimes kind of a divine vision of things in a way. Cubism was one kind of manifestation of that idea.
And we also talked about Charles Birchfield, and the idea that he tries to incorporate all seasons in one painting. And you've been experimenting with that idea in these paintings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't until just a couple of years ago that I realized, or I actually had to read about it, you know, that would be pointed out to me, that in some of Charles Birchfield's paintings, he has all 4 seasons of the same painting. And once that's pointed out to you, you look at it and go, oh yeah, you know, it says you move through the painting, there's all 4 seasons. And he did things called all-day paintings, you know, or all-day drawings, where he'd work on a drawing all day. When I first started painting and I wanted to go outside and make a painting of something, what I was dealing with is when I teach landscape painting, the first thing somebody says is, well, the shadows are moving. You know, what do I do if the shadows are moving? Well, that's your gift. It says shadows are moving. You can put them anywhere you want. But somehow when you're making a painting, you think that they've got to be right there, you know. But it turns out that in, I think, all really interesting and really good paintings, the shadows are all over the place. You look at Rembrandt, and the shadows come from multiple directions. I went off track. What was the question?
The question was about the fact that you've been experimenting, in particular in these paintings, the fact that you include, for example, the painting of the Coreopsis, you know, it's different periods of the same spring, and they're all happening at once in that painting.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, growing up, my mother took a lot of photos, you know, and that was, you know, you talk about how old I am, you know, it's a long time ago, you know, those little black and white photos. And I've always loved looking at photos, those old family photos, but the feeling that I get from those old family photos, nobody else can get, you know, because they don't have all of those experiences. You know, a photo is just a moment frozen in time, and I realized that in paintings, what I wanted to include is that whole experience, you know. So you show somebody a picture of the sunset or wherever it was, you know. So they didn't go swimming in the ocean with you that morning and have this amazing lunch and do all these different things that led to that moment. There isn't all those memories. But what I found when finally I liberated myself from this idea that the shadows all had to line up exactly for that moment, what I found is that, especially up upon conception, is that I wanted to include the time before dawn, at dawn, after dawn, and include in different parts of the painting different times of the day. And the other thing that I learned over a long period of time is that, when I teach life drawing, I learned that if something is pictorially right, then it's anatomically right. People think that Michelangelo's paintings and drawings of the human figure are anatomically right. Like that guy really understood anatomy. It's completely screwy. There's muscles in places where there shouldn't be. It's all anatomically wrong, but it looks right. It's pictorially right. The picture is good, so you believe it as being anatomically right. And most of the time in paintings, whether it's a bee or a landscape or whatever, if you've got to manipulate it and move it all around so that it looks good, and if it looks good, then it is right in terms of the drawing or the anatomy. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I was talking about. It was greatly sort of liberating, and that's finally the only way I could get to it. Well, that painting over there in the far corner where that foreground is all orange, and then there's that that painting is, that painting represents where the light is over about 4 to 5 hours, and it's different in all different parts of the painting. So, and that's the thing that you learn finally about landscape painting, about plein air painting or something, is that you got to just take all the best moments and put them together.
But that said, you, and it's a generalization, for most of your career, you have painted in the light at the end of the day, and this paintings is in the morning, the beginning mm-hmm. of the day. Can you tell us about that shift? Well,
and again, I think what happens, in all of our lives is we sort of look back and then it's so obvious. But when you're in the middle of it, it's not so obvious. And I think a lot of my paintings were kind of about the end of the day. And the end of the day is a time of sort of reflection and kind of, and the light is always so beautiful at the end of the day, because there's more, how the end of the day is sort of hazier, the sunsets are warmer, the light's warmer, and also in painting, if you start painting sort of in the middle of the day, then you're painting towards the end of the day, towards that time. It's harder to start early in the day because the light's getting flatter instead of longer. When in the middle of the day there's no shadows, there's not as much definition, there's not as much form. So if you start in the morning, the shadows are disappearing, but if you start in the afternoon, the shadows are lengthening. But I think that that part of it is I felt in making these paintings that, and this idea of painting earlier in the day and also sort of in the midday, I felt like, it's sort of a funny thing to say. We'll feel a little awkward about saying this, but I think it's the only way to respond to what we've been dealing with, in the world, is that we've got to sort of start over. It's got to be a new day. We've got to think of it as the beginning instead of as at the end, because the end that we're a part of right now is not the one I want my kids to have or inherit, or Jeremy's.
Also a generalization, but most of your prior paintings to this exhibit, your palette was in the blue spectrum, and this journey that you have gone with this set of paintings, we're seeing yellow to pink, we're seeing magenta, we're seeing blue, we're seeing with colors that I personally have not seen in your work before. Can you tell us about that journey?
Well, it's part of this whole idea in a lot of ways that these paintings of Point Conception, in the springtime, the ice plant on top of the point turns this amazing orange and red. And you just can't believe it. You're standing out there and you're looking at it and you say, this can't be real. And I was curious, and then there's all these other things in bloom. So it was like, how do I make a painting about this that is not just gaudy, you know? But then what I learned, I was wondering, why is that ice plant up there? And that's the only place I've really seen that happen. Why is it up there? Why does it get that weird color? And so I asked some botanists about it, and what they told me is that the ice plant, when it gets too much water, gets stressed out. So kind of at the springtime, after there's been some rain, and that particular soil right there, it's you know, there's vernal pools that holds water, and it gets stressed out and turns these oranges and reds. And then during the summer, when there's less water, then it goes back to that beautiful kind of green that the ice plant can be. So not only is it just, well, one idea was there can be great beauty in this stress. You know, I mean, there is, like, when you're challenged, things happen, and that was part of the idea. But also that, I mean, there's something about that color that's really exciting to use. You know, to just break out all those cadmium oranges and reds and put that together. And because my paintings are about what I'm looking at, that was a place where that's what's happening, you know, so I could sort of paint what I'm seeing. Whereas the rest of my world that I spend time in, the ground isn't bright orange like.
No, but I do recall you telling me that it has taken you to this point in life to go to those colors. And you know, and that was exciting. It was something new to go from this pink to magentas, etc.
Oh yeah, but it is. I mean, it's funny. I'm going to be 70 years old. I mean, and people keep reminding me. Did
I say that?
And I know all of you. You never feel like your age, or you never feel like your age. These using that color was a challenge, and I feel, I mean, one of the reasons I decided to become a painter is because I knew it was an area where I could still compete, I could still work at the highest level for the rest of my life. You know, I mean, I was interested in sports and other things, not, you know, but dance and athletics and things like that. You reach a certain plateau and you can't get any better. It's going downhill. But with painting, you know, the best painters, their last painting is their best painting. And so part of it for me is people keep reminding me that I'm an old man now. You know, it's just like I want to do something, you know, that I haven't done before. You know, and sort of take on the next challenge. And working with those colors was a real challenge, to be able to hold them all together. You know.
We've talked. I've always admired in your paintings the foreground, the midground, and the background. Your amateur or your okay painter. You know, everything is in the middle. It's in the center, and you. When we watch your paintings, we go from the intimate to what's far away and what's in the middle ground and the foreground. Can you tell us about the difficulty of conveying that in painting and your work in that dynamic?
Well, that goes to that idea about a painting being non-sequential, you know, every part of it affecting every other part. And one general solution, if you sort of look at more simpler paintings or more amateur paintings, is that whatever in the middle is in focus and everything around it is out of focus. That's one way to sort of hold the painting together. And that speaks to this idea of looking at something and ignoring everything that's around it. There's another kind of painting, you know, I mean, you look at, I think, all the great paintings, where there's something happening everywhere, you know, and I love it in a good painting or good poetry or, you know, good movies. Every time you return to it, you discover something else. You know, it's sort of richer when you look at something. You get, there's this idea, I think it was Fairfield Porter said, that a painting a painting's value is dependent on every part being separate and complete unto itself, yet subordinate to the whole thing. So it's a difference between having every actor in a film being great, but subordinate to the whole idea, or having one star and all these other people that aren't really doing anything. But so I'm really interested in my paintings and having something at the very bottom and something at the very top, and everywhere you look, there being something. I'm trying to figure out a way to say this simply because it can get really technical.
I would love it if you actually get technical.
Let's see if you can hang in there.
Well, okay. In real space, in the space that we walk around in the world in, all the big things are at the bottom and the little things are at the top. So generally, if you're standing on a football field or a long field or standing on the beach, the things that are close to you, you look down, there's like 20 people and they're 10 yards apart. The person that's close to you is much bigger than the person that's farther away. And the person that's closest to you is down lower and the person that's farther away is up higher. And in good paintings, the little things are at the bottom and the big things are at the top. And what happens when you do that is, well, there's sort of a diagram. It's a nice diagram. Actually, Hans, one of the things that I've been really lucky about is I've had great mentors, and Paul Georges showed me this diagram that Hans Hofmann drew for him once about the difference between real space and pictorial space that talks about this. But essentially, when talking about that prehistoric brain and the way we look at something from, you know, an early, more primitive evolution, is so things that are small are far away, things that are big are close to you. So if you put something small at the bottom of the painting, part of you says that that's far away, and you put something, you know, big at the top, that says that that's close. So what that does is it takes this plane and the small thing, it pushes that away and brings that forward. The top of it comes forward, the bottom of it goes away, and then it all sits on the surface. And good paintings, you know, the best paintings have to be flat before they can have illusion. They have to be artificial before they can be a cloud or a boat or something like that, you know. In painting, it's a little bit like, you know, like the best stories, the best movies. I forget that one with Peter Falk at the beginning of the movie, when he says, "I'm going to tell you a story about a dragon that gets eaten by something," and then he tells you the story and that happens. You go, "He told me the truth." You know, that's great. It's a great thing to be told what's gonna happen. So anyway, I could go on.
When you work on this big complex paintings, you live with them, and when we closely observe the paintings, we see the adjustments that you have made in the painting. You know, pentimento. You know, can you tell us about that process of that your paintings, and don't give me the wrong word, and don't get me wrong, but they're not too perfect. They don't seem too polished.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, I forget who it was saying to me the other day that they thought that one of the reasons that Van Gogh is so beloved and stuff is he shows you how the painting is made. You know, there's a kind of painting where it's magic, and you feel like gosh, how did that happen? You know? Then there's another kind of painting where you're invited into the process. You can kind of see the brush strokes. You see how the paint was put on. You see what was underneath. And I think that's more of a contemporary idea, right? To engage the audience in how this was made. I think it's in theater that, what's that called, where you break the fourth wall? Yeah, that kind of idea. And I'm torn because I love that kind of, you know, from abstract expressionist painting on, or Diebenkorn and stuff, where you really see the paint, you know, you see all the movements, and you can be engaged in the hand of it. I think one of the things that fascinated me the most about, I always, you know, growing up, I was fascinated by Monet. I mean, it really was just, you know, fascinating. I read everything there was to read about him, but I'd never really, except for the paintings that we have here at the museum, I'd never seen Monet's paintings. And so I was really excited. It wasn't until I was in college that I got to go to New York and go to the Museum of Modern Art and see that big one that they have, the big water lilies there. And so I was very excited. Went in and I expected some sort of epiphany. And I looked at it and was like, So I just kind of sat down. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. And then suddenly I realized I've been sitting there for about an hour and a half. And what happens in those paintings, I think, in particular, is that you look at the painting and you see that it's water and a water lily. And then you look and you see that it's the brush stroke. And then there's this brush stroke. And so it totally becomes the hand, the activity. And as soon as you see that, then it becomes the water again. So it's constantly going back and forth between the illusion and the not the mechanics of it, but the hand, the person making it. You know, it's that idea. It's like, when I was little, I wanted to be a magician. Right? Nobody could teach me how to do magic, but I think I've always loved magic. You know, that idea that the magician can tell you what they're going to do, and they do it, you can't figure out how they did it. You know, there's sort of that magic in painting too, that you say, oh, that's, yeah, you just do that, put that color on, but then it becomes something. Mm-hmm. So as long as I've been doing this all, as Jeremy said, for 50 years, but I'm still kind of thrilled when you put the right color on something and all of a sudden it becomes round, you know, or the atmosphere. You know, as many times as I've done that, when that happens, it's just magic, you know, it's like, you know, it's like a baby smiling at you or something, you know, it's like magic.
And I want to open it up to the audience for questions, but when leaving the adjustments, where you've made changes and moved, you know, in the paintings, you know, can you tell us, I mean, it's on the same logic that you were just explaining, is to...
Yeah, that's a real interesting question, and there's this thing about if you leave a bunch of, there's people that sort of intentionally make drips on their paintings, you know, sort of throw drips so it looks like there's a lot of activity, you know, and then there's sometimes a drip happens, and you wipe it away right away, or you leave it, you know, and then there's this question about, well, you know, when is it kind of affected and when isn't it affected? You know, to show the hand in it. When is it artificial and when is it real? And when is it part of the process? And there's this great story about Fairfield Porter and the abstract expressionists. When people first started to make abstract paintings, and they're not images, and it's a new kind of painting, do you sign your painting? You know, is it proper to sign the painting and put your name on it and to have something that's literal and recognizable and that you can read, or should that not be there? And then the whole discussion was, well, you know, is it, I'm trying to remember the word, you know, like, is it like egotistical to sign your painting or to not sign your painting? And there's this argument all evening, and finally Fairfield Porter said, You know, if you are an egotistical person, it is egotistical to sign your painting. And if you are not, it is not egotistical. So I think, you know, there's just this thing, if you're engaged in it. The same thing's true of style. You know, people that try to be stylish, they end up looking like everybody else. You know, and
Okay, let's open it up. Yes. Go ahead.
On that signing, it looks like you sign yours in pencil, like in very like.
The question about that his signatures looks like he's signed them in pencil.
well, I do. But what I do, and it took me many years to kind of figure out how to sign my paintings, because, you know, I don't want a giant signature, but you know, people want a painting that's signed, and I'm proud of what I do, and I want my mark to be on there that it's my painting. So finally what I figured out was that when the paint is still wet in a certain area, that if I take a pencil and I sign it into that wet paint, you know, then you can't erase it. And it sort of goes into the paint a little bit, it becomes permanent. But also, I think it's just light enough that you only see it if you look for it. And so I wanted it to be something that didn't stand out, but if you really want to, who made that painting, and you look closely, you can see. And I wanted to write it, I didn't want to have this, you know, fancy signature. I just wanted to make it be as plain as I could make it.
How long have you been doing it all the time?
It's been pretty long now, you know, 20, 30 years maybe now that I've been doing it that way. Yeah, and that's just that idea. So it's only, and then a couple of times I found out that I've signed it twice, you know, because I did it so late.
Any other questions for Mr. Pitcher? Yes, go ahead, sir.
I have two questions. One is, where's the tank
Where's the who? Where's
on the
the
horizon there? I love the tank. I wish you wouldn't have taken it out.
They're gone now.
No, I know they're gone now, but I hope that they were still in the tank. And then
You like the tanks?
I love the tank. It was one of my favorite things in this vista. I always remember coming over Point Conception and seeing the tank. Ooh, what's that over there?
Well, the one on Government or the one on Coho, or
The
both?
one in Cole.
Uh-huh.
Anyway,
Yeah, I have some, I know what you mean.
that's one
It
of
was
the.
a beautiful shape.
And then the other thing is, whatever happened, now see, I've kind of known you maybe 50 years. And I remember in the College of Creative Studies, maybe in the 1970s, you said, I'm going to paint a continuous picture of the entire California coast.
Ooh.
Well,
And I was thinking about it, I think, well, maybe if you add these all up.
well, you know, remember before great weather predictions and things like that, before the surf reports and everything, that the weather report was always, you know, the weather from Point Conception to the Mexican border. You know? And I just always thought that was the most romantic thing imaginable. I mean, that's Southern California, right? And you just say from Point Conception to the Mexican border, and it's just like, yeah. So that was it. It was not the entire coast, it was just from Point Conception to the Mexican border. And I started out to paint it, and I painted a lot of it.
Where did you start?
Where did I start? I started right out at my studio, right at Sands. You know? So I started there, and so I started going up and down, and I started doing sort of pieces of it, figuring that I was going to put it all together. And I also started a project right before that where I was going to paint every day of the decade of the 1920s. And I did about 120 of those paintings, and then I stopped. But I like to take on giant projects like that, you know, and then, you know, if you decide you're going to paint 3,652 paintings and you do 10 one week, it's nothing, you know. But if you decide you're going to paint the entire coast and you paint a quarter of a mile, you're still so that's it. You know, I'm ambitious, and that sort of gets me out
I
there.
have one more question.
Okay.
Where's Michael Drury in all these paintings?
Well, he's in all of them.
No, I know he's
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay.
Go ahead.
Michael Drury is my painting partner, and he's the one that first got me up onto a lot of this land because he had the key to the gate. That was like that was great. So he and I have all these rituals, and you know Michael's just a man of ritual. They have a giant birthday party for his mom because his mom just turned 106. Right? So they have this big birthday party, and he said, "Yeah, it was a great party. You know, there were 60 people." And he said, "There was 3 of my 5 ex-wives at that party."
Go ahead, man.
Hi, I'm not familiar with your 50-year history of painting, but I'm really knocked out by the new landscapes and the Bees series. And I was wondering if you were conscious when you were doing this particular painting behind you, the flowering plant in the foreground looks very much to me kind of like an English botanical print. And yet you look up and you see these very California mountains. And to me, these new series speak of magic realism. It's like the artistic form of magic realism.
Well, you know, I was talking about like working with all these people at the university, and Bruce Tiffany and I, over the last 20 years, have been teaching classes in botanical art and illustration. And I've really come to learn a lot, know about, and have great respect for botanical art and illustration. And one of the things that led me to think about is, you know, that beautiful drawing in botanical illustration, you know, especially the English stuff. The flowers exist on a white background, and what I wanted to try to figure out to do is how to put them into an environment. So to have all of that beauty of that drawing and have the environment and the light and the air, the place where they live.
It's gorgeous.
Thank you. It's very similar to the idea of including people in the landscape. You know, you can make a painting of a person or you can make a painting of a landscape, but you almost can never put them together because the person always dominates, no matter how small you make it. So that's my next show.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm not familiar with where you're standing in this painting behind you, I've never been there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if this is real or not, but I'm seeing 3 pyramids back there.
Yes,
That's
that's Pyramid Peaks.
Oh, so
And
they really do exist.
They exist and they look exactly like this. This is on the west campus of the university, right by the Child Care Center. And it's a view across that field. And that was another thing I learned from Bruce Tiffany, who's also a geologist, is once you see them, you can see them especially in the fall when the light is more raking, is that the way that the mountains have eroded, that there are those pyramids there, and they're really distinct. And it's that funny thing, it's like once you see it, every time you drive along the coast and look up there, you see them. And yeah.
I live by Winchester Canyon, and I see them every day on my way home.
Yeah. I didn't see them until they were pointed out to me, you know, and I grew up looking at them.
Amy, any other question for Mr. Pitcher? Everybody's in. Yeah, but there's a question in the back. Yeah, go ahead. Did you have a question?
I think there's
Oh, she's just trying to. Okay, well, we can continue talking outside. Thank you so much for all.